Howdy guys, Bookie Laura here. Now recently I spent way too much time on NetGalley and requested several copies of books, one of which is the book that I'm reviewing today, which is Sleepover by H.G. Wells. Now believe it or not, I don't actually request that many books on NetGalley. I've heard awful horror stories of people requesting absolutely tons of them and never actually getting around to read them, but I try and stick really rigidly to books that I really want to read, books that really appeal to me. And so I always look for that something special when I'm reading about them, and not just, oh, that sounds cool, but something that really intrigues me. And it was definitely the plot of Sleepover which really intrigued me. The basic idea is that one day, out of absolutely nowhere, human beings lose the inability to sleep. Everybody in the whole world, on the whole of the planet, just one night is unable to sleep. And it's basically that. It's the story of kind of an insomnia apocalypse, if you will. It's told through a series of almost short stories, a series of each chapter follows a different character and their experiences, and it's almost like a retelling. So you're vaguely aware that it wasn't the end of the world, but you're unsure of exactly, you know, how much significance, how much of an impact this had. So it, like I say, each chapter follows a different character, their experiences, and they're in sort of time order. So those at the beginning of the book are retelling the experiences, what, the first signs of the end of the world? Sleep loss. And as they go later and later, they deal with the consequences much later. I think for me, when I read this plot idea, it was just such a fantastic concept that I knew I really had to give it a read. The idea that actually one day human beings would just not be able to sleep, and you're sort of vaguely aware, I think, that sleep is quite integral to being alive and functioning as a human being. But I guess there are a lot of grey areas, a lot of uncertainty around, well, what exactly does happen and how quickly does it happen if you stop sleeping? So I think I was quite intrigued in the science behind it, but also in just the general idea of actually the end of the world in a way that I'd never really read about it before. It was really intriguing. Another thing which really stood out to me was actually there were a lot of similarities between this and the World War Z by Max Brooks, I think. There were a lot of similarities. The sort of way it's written in a retelling by different characters at different stages in the process of the end of the world, it was a huge parallel. So if that style of book appeals to you, then it definitely would. I think I read another one. I want to say Robopocalypse was similar, but I can't remember if it was that book or a different one. But anyway, it's that retelling events by different characters at different stages in the journey to the end of the world that's basically very similar. I preferred it to World War Z, but I think that's to do with my own preferences, that actually reading about zombies isn't that interesting for me, but reading about something that felt a bit more real, that, you know, the end of the world because people suddenly one day something has changed in human genetics, something, a mutation has happened, just felt a bit more real. Another really interesting thing was that when I was looking at the books on NetGalley and I saw the title and I saw the author, it was probably the name of the author which made me go and read the synopsis of the book. Because H.G. Wells sounds a lot like H.G. Wells. And I think, although I didn't read it for the author's name, it was something that intrigued me. It was something that made me kind of like, you know, have that second glance at the book rather than just skimming straight past it. Whereas when it came up on my Facebook that I was reading a book called Sleepover, my brother commented and said, it sounds amazing, but I don't think I could read it just based on the author's name alone. Which sounds very harsh, but I kind of see where he was coming from, that actually it does feel like, you know, the author has chosen to write their name in that format, so it will be compared to H.G. Wells, and maybe that is, I don't know, hanging on somebody else's coattails? Is that the expression? But anyway, if you can look beyond that, this is definitely a book worth reading. It's an amazing concept. The idea, I love a book that just has a cracking, original, unique idea, and this book really, really does. It's written in a kind of, not unique way, but you know, a not your typical format. It uses a different format, which is really interesting, and I think it does it really well. I mean, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and it was a book that I actually flew through really, really quickly. I was always really interested to see what would happen. The only downside for me is that I find in these style of books where you're flitting between different characters, you never really get that level of connection with a character. I mean, I was often quite interested or disappointed not to know how it turned out in the end for them. You was often given, you know, just a snapshot of their experience, but not more. And I feel like actually I would have liked to have known more. But then I often think that's the sign of a good book, when actually at the end of it you think, oh, I wish I knew more about how these characters ended up. I think if you like science fiction books which feel like they're based in actual real science, then this is going to be good, because actually the author had really researched this. I read the acknowledgements at the end, and it was clear that she'd put a lot of research into it, and that is always cool in my book. If you like that kind of end of the world story, then that's also going to interest you. And if you liked World War Z and that style of storytelling through different characters' recounts, then you will like it too. I do recommend it. It's a cracking read. Not the best thing I've read in my whole life, but a solid 4-star read, and I'm glad that I read it. I don't regret it, and I think I'm always very nervous with arcs that you're going to come across a book that actually isn't that good, that actually you're going to feel like, oh, I should read it and I should review it. But I've been really fortunate so far, and I think it's where I'm quite selective. I pick books that the idea sounds really good to me and it pays off. If you've read this book, then let me know. If you've read World War Z, or if you know what I'm talking about with Robopocalypse, then let me know as well, because I would love to talk about those books. I will talk about any books that I've read. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.